Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to discuss the modern concept of state. So, a state is a distinct and autonomous political entity that exercises sovereignty and control over a defined territory and is comprised of a permanent population. It is fundamental unit of governance in the international system and possesses the following defining characteristics, which is political entity, territorial sovereignty, and population. So basically, political entity, sovereignty, and population are the paramount characteristics of a state. If any of these characteristic or the important unit is not available for a state, it cannot be called as a state. Because if a state has not population, then it will not be called a state because there will be no governmental authority to rule over population. And if there is no sovereignty, then there is high chances other states can declare war or capture their land. So these are the most important characteristics of a state. So next are the characteristics of state. The characteristics of state include rule of law, separation of power, protection of human rights, which I'm going to discuss. So basically, rule of law is a thing that state upholds the rule of law, which means that the legal system is supreme and all individuals, including government officials, are subject to and accountable under law. Laws are applied uniformly, everyone is equal before law, and there is a transparent and independent judiciary to adjudicate legal disputes and ensure justice. Because where there is justice, there is law. And Aristotle clearly adjudicates the justice is necessary for ruler to implement in the society. Separation of power. So the most important um, foundations of government are legislature, judiciary, and executive. So these all institutions have separate power. For example, legislature has the right or power to make laws. Executive has right or power to execute the laws made by legislature, and judiciary has the right to see if these institutions are working within their defined jurisdiction or if there is any um, violation of law. So the next thing is protection of human rights, because in a state where there is no protection of human right, it can be lead to civil war. And when there is civil war, obviously there is disruption, there can be inflation in the society or in the country, which can lead to the economic instability of the country. So the protection of human rights are the most important um or one of the most important characteristic of a modern state, which the governments should uphold. Economic development in today's, you can say the concept of modern state, economic development is very much important. The reason is that if a country is not economically strong enough, then the country's stance, its foreign policy, will not be strong enough at the international level, or there can be chances of political instability. Because if economically the country is not stable enough to protect or to give the basic necessities of life to the people, then there can be high chances of civil disruption or street crimes and many other crimes. So economic development leads to a country in a more advanced way. In economic development, there is industrialization, there is globalization, there is connectedness of economies, and a much more. There is the insurance of right to education to every youth, or the economic development made the societies to upfront or to stand out at international forum. Democratic governance. Democracy has been one of the most important fundamental characteristic of a modern state, because we see in dictatorship there can be no guarantee of human rights, but there are some instances that there can be. But in a more conventional monarchy or aristocratic way of government, human rights were not that much guaranteed. So democratic government means that there are protected rights of human um, and the people. There are the political rights available to them. They can choose their leader who will govern them. They can even choose the leader that he is not going to be our leader anymore. So, democratic governance has the ability, gives the ability to its people to act actively in in a very political way. And this, leads to the transparency and accountability, because if a citizen has a right to vote to a particular individual to rule over, so the individual who will be the ruler, or the official of the government, will have to be transparent in its policies and in its finances as well. So people can hold him accountable, and people in democratic governance, people can question him about his income beyond means, and he can hold him accountable for the laws and regulations, the policies and priorities he is going to take for the country. And this transparency and accountability leads to the legal framework for economic activity, which means that when there is accountability, obviously the ruler will be held accountable for its income, for its for example, he has such kind of resources. People can question him that how this luxury or these things came from. People can ask things beyond income. And in legal framework, economic activity boosts well, because when there is transparency and accountability, everyone knows that there is no area for corruption. And where is no area for corruption, the legal framework works very well, and which leads to the political stability. And when there is a political stability in a country, then the policies made by the legislature or the government or ministers, etc., they make such kind of policies which are beneficial or in favor for their country. And when there is economic activity which leads to infrastructure development, obviously there can be a lot of buildings, there can be a lot of startups, there can be a lot of business, and things then gradually become in the favor of country's economic growth. And when there is high level of economic activity, countries introduce social welfare programs, which are beneficial for the citizens. uh, USA has one of the highest social welfare programs in the world, as for now. And the reason is that the superpower, or the countries who are important on the international forum or map of the world, they make sure that their citizens are well fared enough to pursue their better quality of life. Finland is the highest happy people, because there is a lot of social welfare programs, there is infrastructure development, there is accountability and transparency. So people seek uh, an important welfare programs for themselves. There is free education, and a lot of more programs available to them. So these social welfare programs lead to, you can say, in a very happy index of a country's people, or in a very economic stability of a country. And obviously when there is, political stability, civil stability, economic stability, then the minorities of a country, those rights are protected. Because at some time in my previous video I talked about, uh, when there is not enough representation of minorities in a country, their rights can be for granted as well. So in established countries, economically established countries, politically established countries, the protection of minority rights are guaranteed. And then there is environmental stewardship, because there is very much importance of environmental or climate change. And in a recent conference where it was decided that the international climate change causes a very much disruption in countries, and due to which it is advisable for countries to implement such policies which will lower the temperature of their countries as much as by 2 degrees C, and 1.5 degrees C is preferable. So, the Germany has been very vocal for economic stewardship, and it has one of the highest green movements in the world, and they, favor the environmental stewardship. They favor the environmental change programs a lot more. And these kind of programs are, taken in initiative by international corporations, and these kind of international corporations promote peace, they enhance economic relations, they address global changes, and which leads to the um, inclusivity and non-discrimination at international arena. Role of state in our society. The characteristics of society can also be, you can say, take as a role of society, because their society, states consider the implementation of law, they protect the basic fundamental rights of individuals, they protect freedom of individuals, there are public services and infrastructures, there is economic regulation and development. The national defense and security is one of the most important role taken by the state. There are social welfares and safety nets. There is diplomacy and international relations, because in these modern era, the globalization has, interconnected the states in a way that it is not possible for states to live in isolation, because they had to export things, they have to import things, and they have to have foreign relations with other states. So diplomacy and international relations are very much important in the modern society or in the modern state. There are infrastructure development, education is promoted at every level, and cultural promotion is also, one of the things which countries upheld when they meet at international conferences or international arenas. And public health and safety is advisable for the state, because if there is no insurance of public health and safety, then, or there is no provision of modern public health technology, then the individuals cannot have enough public health uh, advantages. Then there is justice and legal system, which leads to the separation of power. There are taxation and resource allocation. So the characteristics and the role of state is, you can say, almost the same. So liberalism and the state. Liberalism is a political and philosophical ideology that has a profound influence on the role and functions of the state. Here are some important points that highlight the relationship between liberalism and the state. There is individual liberty. The individual has right to live, right to have property, right to have children, right to have um, political rights. There is individual liberty guaranteed in a liberalist state. There is limited government, which means that liberalism advocates for a limited government that does not intrude excessively into the lives of the citizens. So the state should not only intervene when necessary to protect the individual rights. When there is necessary, the state should intervene. When there is not, the state shouldn't, to maintain order, to maintain address and market failure. Rule of law. Liberals emphasize the importance of rule of law. The state is expected to establish a legal framework that is transparent, impartial, and applies quality to equally to all citizens, including those in government. This ensures that the government's actions are accountable and just enough to implement the rule of law. Protection of property rights. Property rights are a core component of liberalism because in some political philosophers they rejected the idea of having property. So um, the state is responsible for protection of individual rights to own and use property, which includes safeguarding against theft, fraud, and expropriation. Market economy. Liberalism generally supports a market based economy where individuals have freedom to engage in economic activity. The state's role in the economy is often limited to ensuring fair competition, enforcing contracts, and preventing fraud. So, there is also an ideology where state should not intervene actively in market, or there are uh, ideology like ordo liberalism of Germany that the state should intervene enough in market to implement order in the market. So then there is toleration and pluralism. Liberals value tolerance and pluralism. Pluralism means that acceptance of many others. Like for example, there is a state in which there are many nationalities. For example, there are uh, whites, there are blacks, there are Muslims, there are Hindus. So pluralism is that the one who accepts these the existence of these nationalities or religion or state or race, language, culture, etc. So pluralism emphasize the importance of diverse opinions, cultures, and beliefs within a society. The state should be impartial and inclusive, respecting the rights and freedoms of all citizens regardless of their background. Individualism. Liberalism places a strong emphasis on individualism, where individuals are seen as autonomous agents capable of making their own choices. This contrasts with collectivist ideology that prioritize the group or community over individual. So this is the thing that individual has right to do anything. He cannot have the influence of other people to act upon in a certain way. So there is a contradictory theory of collectivists, which means that the community or the collective people come first over the individuals. So individualism negates that ideology. Social safety nets. While liberals advocate for a limited government, many also recognize the need for social safety nets to provide assistance to those in need. This may include programs for healthcare, education, and unemployment benefits to ensure a basic level of well being for all citizens. Peaceful conflict resolution. Liberalism promotes the peaceful resolution of conflicts, both domestically and internationally. Diplomacy, negotiation, and international institutions are seen as essential tools for maintaining peace and cooperation among states. Secularism. Secularism means that a state separates their government from religion. And many liberal societies are characterized by secularism, where their state is separated from religious institutions. There is also a theory of separation of church from state. This separation ensures religious freedom and prevents the imposition of religious beliefs on individuals. Universal human rights. Liberalism often aligns with the concept of universal human rights, which are considered inalienable and applicable to all individuals, regardless of their nationality or citizenship. The state is expected to protect and promote their rights because uh, if they are living in a state, they are the subject of the state, and the administration or government or state um, should protect the human rights of all minority and majority individuals. Democratic governance. Liberalism and democracy often go in hand, and many liberal societies adopt democratic form of governments where leaders are elected by the people for the people, and they are, checks and balances, transparency and accountability to prevent the abuse of power. And separation of power is also an important tenet of democratic government. Nationalism and the state. Nationalism is a political and cultural ideology that places a strong emphasis on nation as a central organizing principle. It often influences the role and character of a state in several ways, like primacy of a nation, which means that nationalism asserts the primacy of a nation, which is defined as a community of people who shared common language, culture, religion, race, ethnicity, and often a sense of identity and destiny. The state is expected to prioritize the interest and well being of national community. And when there is primacy of nationalism, the nationalism emphasizes the development and preservation of distinct national identity, which means that the state may promote cultural institutions, language, symbol, and historical narrative that reinforce the national or nation's identity. State as a guardian of national interests. Nationalism expects that the state to act as guardian of national interest, whether those interests are political, economic, cultural, or sometimes religious. The state is seen as responsible for advancing and protecting the nation's goals and aspirations. Territorial sovereignty, which I have discussed earlier. Territorial sovereignty is one of the key tenets of a state, which means that if a state is having a territory, then territorial sovereignty is a must for strong attachment to a specific territory associated with nation. States are expected to maintain territorial integrity and protect against external threats to a national sovereignty. And this protection of national sovereignty leads to the promotion of national unity, where the diverse population within a state under the common national identity, uh, they promote their national unity, and they integrate minority groups into a dominant national culture, which leads to the homogenization or integration of minority and majority individuals. Defending national interests in foreign policy, which means that nationalism often guides a state's foreign policy decisions, which may lead to assertive foreign policies aimed at advancing the nation's interests, protecting the rights of co ethnic or co national groups abroad, or asserting dominance on the international state, which means that if a state is having a national interest to promote climate change, then it is in its foreign policy to promote the climate change at the international level. Next is challenges to multinational states. Nationalism can pose challenges to states with diverse populations. It may lead to a, you know, demands of greater autonomy or even succession by minority groups that seeks to assert their own national identity and sovereignty. We see this example in history that there are a lot of countries who run their successionist movements to gain independence from their parent company. You can say the example when USSR was disintegrated, there were a lot of countries who were in who got independence. When uh, we take the example of subcontinent, when there were Brits ruling over subcontinent, they run successionist movement, and three of countries of India, Bangladesh, Pakistan were formed. So when there is a challenge, and when there is a stance of not protecting minority rights enough, which leads to these multinational successionist movements. Then there is emphasis on national symbols and icons, which means that nationalism often places a significance on national symbols, flags, anthems, and historical figures. Like, for example, when there is a speech and international forum, then it may be possible that a state may, hoist its flag, or China is one of the, country who speaks in its own language, like Chinese language. Although English is an internationally recognized official language, but still there are countries who choose to speak in their own languages. Turkey is also one of them. So this is the thing of emphasis on national symbols and icons. Then obviously national education and things, civic nationalism versus ethnic nationalism, which means that nationalism can take different forms, including civic or national, and which there is a thing that civic nationalism emphasizes shared values and principle, and ethnic nationalism, which focuses on common ethnic or cultural ties. The form of nationalism can influence state policies and inclusivity. Obviously, when there is, national identity and political moment, when there is a nationalism, legalism, and the state. Legalism is a school of thought in ancient Chinese philosophy that emphasizes strict adherence to law and the authority of the state. It has a significant influence on the rule and function of the state in Chinese history and political philosophy. For example, primacy of a state, like legalism places the state at the center of political life. The state is considered the supreme authority, and its power and stability are paramount. The ruler, according to legalist thought, is the embodiment of state authority. Then there can be authoritarian rule in a legalist state, that legalism advocates for a strong centralized authoritarian rule, and it argues that a powerful and uncompromising state led by a strict and decisive ruler, and which is essential for maintaining order and stability and rule of law in a society. Punitive measures, legalism emphasizes the use of punitive measures to deter wrongdoing. Harsh punishments for violation of law are seen as necessary to maintain social order and obedience to the state's authority. Metrocracy. Metrocracy is a thing in which legalism supports the metrocratic system, where individuals are appointed positions of power based on their abilities and performance rather than the hereditary status or privilege. So, there is a thing that in politics there is a hereditary policy or politics. When uh, a grandfather is a is a politician, then his children, his son or his daughter is gonna be a politician, and then his grandchildren or granddaughter is gonna be a politician. So in legalism, this kind of meritocracy is not permissible. And then centralized administration. Legalism advocates for a highly centralized and efficient administrative system. Bureaucracy is seen as a means to enforce the law, maintain control over the state's territory and population. Then there can be a censorship and control of information. There can be a realism in a foreign policy when state is prioritizing in its own interest and security, and diplomacy and alliances are seen as a tool to strengthen the state's position and power in the international arena. There can be a economic policies based on legalist approach, emphasizing the importance of economic prosperity and resources to support the state's authority and stability. There can be a secularism in legalist state where they separate religion and the state. Or there can be, innovative and adaptive sort of, advancement in a legalist state. Obviously, secularism is a thing where there is religious neutrality, and there is also religious acceptance as well. And there is a freedom of religion because individuals are, you know, um, they have right and freedom to exercise their religion, and uh, no other force can dominate over their religion. And there is separation of state and church. There is equality before law. No one is gonna be dominate over the minority because of their particular religion. uh, in the legalist state there is the rule of law, and there is equality before law. No one is, greater than the law. Then, obviously, in a secular state, there is expression and critique as well, but this expression and critique should be in a very behaved manner, so that they does not pinpoint or hurt the sentiments of others or others people or others religion. There is protection of minority rights. There is religious neutrality in education as well, and civil marriage and family law states that secular states often oversee civil marriage and family law, ensuring the legal aspect of marriage, divorce, and inheritance are governed by civil codes rather than the religious law. There is secular courts and legal system. There is freedom of religious coercion. There is political pluralism as well, because in a country, they prefer to have politicians or governmental officials from all around the um, religious representatives. So in secular state there is religious pluralism as well as political pluralism. So there is protection of non-believers as well, because atheists in a secular state, they have the same rights as religious peoples. So they cannot be discriminated. Then there are challenges faced by modern states. Obviously, we have talked about economic instability, and the reasons behind economic instability can be political instability. There can be non-representative of minority rights. One of the reasons of economic instability can be fluctuation in global markets and internal economic system. And there can be not enough integrated education. There can be poor health, um, public health quality. There can be cybersecurity threats. There can be social unrest, civil wars, natural disasters, migration crisis, urbanization, and whatnot. That's for today for modern concept of state. Thanks for watching.